Chapter 1. Rules of an Assassin. Rain was an interesting thing. When cooshed by the warmth of a home, it was pleasant, a gentle and soothing rhythm for the soul. When unfettered, pelting from above and soaking its victims through, it was uncomfortable, bone-chilling, and relentless in its patient torture. Walking through the rain on this day, Theron felt the same about it as he always did. It helped him feel. Every flash of lightning and clap of thunder was another song in his mind, his steps moving to their cadence and his heart beating to their rhythm. It was the perfect night, honestly. The perfect night to kill. Tonight he would complete a mission that had haunted the Bronze Assassins for many years. Theron's black robes were already soaked through, his hood forming a wet layer over his dark hair, and yet his icy blue eyes stared forward, unwavering. A change to the cadence of the rain caught his attention. He was too used to its delicate pitter-patter. The slightest shifts resonated in him like a stone dropping onto the surface of a calm lake. Water Mancers like himself weren't known for their great combat strength, and most certainly couldn't pick out changes in the rain like Theron, but control was their specialty. It was why he was so confident. Another assassin. Theron's steps paused. With a light touch that didn't even disturb the puddle beneath his feet, he slipped into an alley. The target was a tycoon of a small city with a population of less than 20,000. Their estate was located at the core of the town and took precedent even over the mayor's mansion. Security was tight, but it could be said that the tycoon's greed was also his downfall. With how large the compound was, sneaking in hadn't been a problem for Theron, and it clearly hadn't been a problem for this assassin as well. In the rain, it could be said that Theron's concealment was unmatched. He slipped through buildings and slid through the shadows of trees and shrubbery, rounding the compound until he had sights on the back of his new target. As expected, it was another bronze assassin. Theron didn't have eyes on his face, but he was highly adept at reading the posture and gait of people. Bronze assassin Lynn. Theron's interactions with other assassins were few and far between. That said, he had a deep Rolodex of knowledge regarding them nonetheless. At the very least, at the bronze assassin level, there was no one he didn't have information on. The second rule of the association. An assassin's greatest weapon was not their blade, but their mind. Lynn slid through the shadows, moving with a sharpness that belied his stupidity. Fool. Though impressive in movement, Lynn's approach was too naive. He was approaching the estate from the west wing as it had the most lax security, but he couldn't see the obvious trap right before him. Theron had analyzed every mission report. He had even been staying in this small town for the past month, listening to the stories of passers-by, tales of the assassins who didn't get the chance to return to report anything. If it was so easy to approach from the wing with the most lax security, everyone would have done it. A sudden spark caught Theron off guard. Lynn's robes fluttered, an arc of yellow lightning spreading out from him in a subtle sphere. The lightning dispersed quickly, and by the time it was a foot from his body, it was almost indiscernible beneath the heavy rain. I'm too close. Theron moved, his cloak fluttering up to reveal a short sword and a dagger by his waist. He used the momentum of the wind to reveal their hilts, unsheathing them in a fluent motion. The spark of lightning was no doubt a detection skill. Lynn hadn't noticed his presence, but he must have realized the surroundings were too quiet. Feeling that something was wrong, he chose the path of added caution. He wasn't as foolish as he seemed. Lightning Mancers were known for their reaction speed and attack power. There should be very few reconnaissance and auxiliary abilities like this one. The third rule of the association. Adaptability was more important than strength. Theron's speed wasn't as fast as Lynn's, but he acted first. As the ripple of lightning passed over him, and Lynn realized there was someone to his back, Theron's short sword had already thrust forward. He could feel the blade gliding through the droplets of rain. Each trickle was like an extension of his senses, rebounding against and resonating with his blade. Lynn turned toward him in a hurry, unsheathing a blade to counter. A flicker of shock rippled through Lin's brown eyes when he met Theron's cold gaze. "Don't you?" Their blades clashed. The strength of Theron's initiative forced Lin a step back. The latter's dagger almost slipped out of his grasp, but Theron's own had surged forward. "Damn it!" Lin thrust out with his free hand, an arc of lightning pulsing toward Theron. The flash of gold reflected in Theron's cool blue eyes. They were so clear that Lin could see his own reflection within them, and the calm indifference in the face of his attack. The droplets of water around Theron pooled together, forming a guard that wrapped around his thrusting dagger, down his wrist and up his arm. The lightning collided with the surface and followed the path of least resistance, rounding Theron's back and sparking out in a puddle behind him. Without the time to cast a skill with more focus, Lin's lightning was useless against Theron. Especially in this rain. The dagger pierced into Lin's chest. Droplets of rain that had coated it suddenly exploded out like the pieces of a grenade beneath Theron's control, rupturing the Lightning Mancer's inner organs. "You." Lin's gaze flickered with unwillingness, rage, and helplessness. Rule number 1 of the association. Never kill your fellow assassin. It was a nice rule. It was just unfortunate that Theron didn't care. Chapter 2, Forward. The torrential downpour showed no signs of stopping. What blood there would have been was washed away, and to all but Theron, so too were the sounds. Theron scanned the region and then crouched down. He pulled at Lin's robes to reveal what was underneath. It was impossible for him to take most of this. Even if it wasn't for Rule 1 of the association, his information file on Lin was enough. He hadn't confirmed it previously, but after their battle, he was certain. Mancer abilities were hereditary and family members' shared affinities. After seeing Lin's Lightning Mancy in person, he could confirm that he was Silver Assassin Raiden's younger brother. It was hard to confirm family relationships in the association because there were not only strict rules against killing, but there were also such rules against nepotism and things of the like. It could be said that Lin was more likely to be harmed by his elder brother than helped. The confirmation was still important to Theron, so he understood how he should maneuver himself and prepare for the future. The cloak, the dagger, about 800 or so bronzes. Both treasures are high quality, but I can't sell them, that'll leave a trace. The bronzes should be fine. Bronzes were the default currency of all bronze mancers, though often used by silver mancers as well. It was quite a pretty sum, and under normal circumstances, Theron would be happy to accept it. The trouble was that the reward for this mission was more than 10 times that, so it didn't taste as sweet. The dagger will still be useful for this mission, then I'll find a place to toss it. Theron stood to his feet and returned to the eastern wing of the estate. His own dagger was a common item, forged by normal iron. His short sword was a bronze soul item, a carry-over from a life before this, one that was much warmer. A wall of green blocked Theron's path forward. Rather than steel, concrete, or bricks, the final defensive line of choice for the target was a well-trimmed line of bushes. Hidden behind a tree, Theron stared at this line of defense for a long while. Until now, every step was practiced and perfect, following a plan he had outlined time and time again. This part was also well outlined, but it had unavoidable hiccups, ones that couldn't be erased without personal experience of what was inside. He didn't kill Lin because he was worried about the latter stealing his kill. As far as Theron was concerned, there was no chance of that. He killed Lin for this step. Only without interference would this work. A heavy raindrop landed on Theron's head. As though a gong in his mind, he rushed forward. His steps seemed to glide over the stretch of grass, not bending even a single blade. The rain became his domain, the reflection of several figures echoing in his mind. Every slight change to the rhythmic pitter-patter was as grating as a fork across metal in his ears. Akin to a soaring eagle. He launched himself over the well-trimmed bushes in a single bound. He appeared behind one of the figures, masking himself beneath the heavy downpour and drawing a blade across his neck. Before his first target even fell to the ground, he had vanished once again, appearing behind another. One slash, one kill. Most weren't even bronze mancers. Such experts were not cheap. This target might be a legend to the bronze assassins, but everything was relative. If he was so strong in both power and resources, this would be a mission for silver assassins. Smooth in his malice, Theron might be described by most as moving like the wind. But in his mind, he was as fluid as water, as sharp as a droplet rebounding against the ground, as relentless as an endless stream. But the hiccup he knew was bound to come did exactly that. He had been thorough in his preparation, but it was impossible to consider every detail. So when he sensed two figures moving together, he was faced with two options. The first was to ignore them and go the other way, hoping they wouldn't run into the string of corpses he had left behind and alert the target. The second was to attack and hope that he could kill them before the commotion attracted others. Theron took the second option. Pressing his back against a wall, Theron waited as they approached. The echoes of the rain made their forms clearer and clearer in his mind, and just as they were barely 3 meters from him, a coil of water formed behind them, wrapping around one's ankle and pulling at just the right. The guard tripped and fell forward. Theron burst into action. Just as the second guard reached down to help him, Theron's dagger had appeared. The second guard was shocked, but his first reaction was to defend himself. Why should he care about the estate if he was dead? It was too late to draw a weapon, so he raised a hand, a sheen of earth appearing on his forearm. PCHU. Theron's short sword ripped through his heart. The second guard was so distracted by the threat of the dagger that he didn't notice Theron had a second weapon. A familiar scene replayed itself as droplets of rain exploded in the second guard's chest. By this point, the first guard was already getting up to his feet. Theron's wrist flexed, and the second guard fell toward the first. The sudden weight caught the man off guard, and he fell to his face once more, only for Theron's blade to drive through the both of their bodies at once. There are more bronze mancers than I anticipated. I'm using up too much mana. Theron looked up. If he didn't succeed today, it was hard to say when he'd get another chance. It wasn't often that it rained this hard for so long. After putting more than a month into this mission, backtracking now wasn't an option. Forward. Chapter 3, Merchant Greycoat. Theron took deep breaths. Checking his mana reserves, he realized he had no more than 10% left. It's enough. The core of the compound lay below him, and a string of corpses lay behind him. Ahead should be the location of the target. With light steps, Theron slipped ahead. Without the rain, he had to be more cautious with his movements. Any unnecessary sound could alert the enemy. So, using his Water Mancer, he expelled all the rain from his cloak and clothing, carrying it all in a small orb that floated behind him, silent but deadly. What Theron didn't expect was for the target to be sitting on a plush reclining chair, looking right at him with an amused smile on his face. The target was known as Merchant Greycoat. He was a heavy-set man, much like many others of his profession, but he lacked the bejeweled, blinged-out appearance to match. There wasn't a single speck of wealth on him that wasn't inlaid right into his green and gold robes. You assassins are all so amusing, coming here to die on your own. Don't you know how foolish you are? Merchant Greycoat slowly stood to his feet. There was a rush of wind, and green mist whirled around his body. The man was so relaxed that he was using his wind mancy to stand. There is no one on this compound capable of sneaking up on me. You know why I built such a large, hollow hall outside? There's a clear rush of wind that runs across it. With my abilities, could you sneak up on me even if you wanted to? Merchant Greycoat smiled, a sick, self-satisfied smile. Was it giggling his neck or was it his chin? It was hard to tell. You can die now. The merchant raised a hand, and a rune flashed on his finger. A ring hidden in plain sight manifested and glowed with a green light. The wind around it swirled, and a rotating arrow of wind took shape, exuding a jade color. The skill finished forming instantly. rushing toward Theron in a whirlwind. Theron's expression changed, and he turned to run, the ball of water behind him becoming a shield. A hint of surprise formed on the merchant's face, but not enough to change anything. There was a huge gap between formless mana and one focused with a skill. As expected, the swirling arrow blew the shield of water apart. It lost some of its glow, but it still collided with Theron's back, sending him sprawling out of the window he had come from. A mouthful of blood came from Theron's mouth as he rolled. He rushed to his feet and bolted down the open-air hallway, moving with the greatest speed he could muster. Laughter came from behind him as more rings began to manifest from thin air on Merchant Greycoat's thick fingers. He glided on a current of wind, closing the distance on Theron so fast it seemed he might swallow him whole. Theron twisted back and threw his dagger, startling the merchant. They had been in no man's land during the chase. The merchant wasn't yet close enough for Theron to do something so drastic, but he wasn't far away enough for the fact that the dagger wasn't a flying dagger to matter. A sheen of blue coated the common treasure, and it appeared before the merchant with great speed, taking advantage of the latter's forward momentum. Another ring lit up on the merchant's finger, and a whirlwind of jade wind appeared around him, shattering the dagger. Merchant Greycoat was stunned before he let out a hearty laugh. "You came to assassinate me with mere common weapons. You just might laugh me to my death." Theron didn't respond. Using the short lull of time, he bought himself to reach the end of the hallway and burst out into the rain. The smell had hit him long ago, but the fresh coat of moisture was like a tonic to his veins. He spun around, letting his momentum glide him backward across the soft, wet grass. Locking onto the merchant, he began to gather up the last of his mana, an icy glow pulsing in his irises. Merchant Greycoat suddenly came to a stop at the end of the hall. He looked down at the sputtering line of moist concrete and shook his head with a chuckle. "Do you know why you're especially foolish? I chased after you just for a bit of fun, but if you're asking me to get wet, you're asking for too much. I do not need to kill you personally." The merchant pulled at his sleeve and revealed a bracelet hidden underneath. With a swipe, a signal was launched into the air, ignoring the ceiling entirely. Then he stood there and waited in the warmth with a smile on his face. Time ticked by, and yet, even after several seconds, nothing came. "Do you know why you're especially foolish?" Theron spoke for the first time. His voice was gentle. It was the kind one would expect from a scholar or professor, not from an assassin. Although it had the deep cadence of a man, it lacked any sort of forcefulness. "You can't even realize you're being led by the nose. Your guards, they're all dead." Theron's short sword slipped into his palm as he accelerated forward. A lance of water mana formed around it, and it seemed to contain everything Theron had left. The merchant was shocked and moved to block, but he remembered too late that he had already used the shield cast on his right hand, and it was already too late to use the one on his left. Theron's short sword drove into his chest, only to be met with substantial resistance. The blade bent into a crescent and could have snapped if it hadn't been a bronze soul treasure. Bang! The merchant's robes exploded, revealing a now damaged inner armor. Its runes flickered, some blinking out entirely. "Ha ha ha," Merchant Greycoat chuckled in his shock. He had forgotten that he wore inner armor. He looked up, ready to bask in Theron's despair, only to find a flash of gold instead. Theron drove Lynn's bronze soul dagger right through the blinking runes of the inner armor. An explosion of lightning cut away the last of Merchant Greycoat's life. Chapter 4, Not So Easy. The Association. It was the name the assassins who joined it knew it by, but to the outside world, they were known as the Daggers of the Night. They were far from the only assassin guild on the continent, but they did have a firm hold on the province. If one were to name the main centers of power in the Night Province, there was the Night Empire, ruled by the Nightingale family, the Obsidian Eclipse sect, and finally, the Daggers of the Night. Most would not dare to say this aloud. An assassin guild could never be acknowledged as a legitimate power. These undercurrents ruled the province, and it was to this power in the shadows that Theron returned. The daggers of the night didn't have just one location. As a power hidden in the shadows, it was scattered across the province, hidden in the crevices of the empire. Before one became a gold assassin, they couldn't truly be considered a member of the organization. This was an odd thing to say, considering gold mancers were the strongest of the night province, but in practice, it was functionally true. This was because, before reaching that step, rather than being an assassin of the daggers of the night, you were instead beholden to a single branch alone, without a chance to interact with the others. Every branch was headed by a gold assassin and had leagues of bronzes and silvers beneath them. Theron's particular branch was located in Thistlebrook City, one of the 10 largest outside the core of the empire. Theron walked into a mercenary guild and paid a fee for a room. After a bite to eat, he made his way up the rickety stairs and into his accommodations. But instead of laying to rest, he walked toward a cracked and graying mirror. Placing his hands on its surface, Theron chanted unintelligible words in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Hidden runes on the back of his hand came to life, and his palm slipped through the mirror's surface. Soon, his body disappeared into the mirror. Theron's vision cleared, and he found himself standing in the same position in a more familiar room. He had always found the methods of the daggers of the night fascinating. An organization on this level shouldn't have such methods, it made one wonder. The room was quaint and dark, the walls carved out of gray stone not much unlike the bed. Other than a pillow and a blanket, there was nothing else of note, and Theron preferred it that way. He left the room and walked down the sparsely lit corridors. These headquarters were almost certainly carved out of a mountain somewhere, but just wondering about this was dangerous business. The hallway ended, giving way to a simple round room. There were some tables where a few assassins gathered, but the main attraction was a counter located in a far corner. An old man sat behind it, part dozing off, but it was his existence that kept everyone else in line. Theron's appearance didn't garner much attention. He rarely spent much time in the association, and it had been a month since he took the mission. So many had taken and failed it by now that it no longer held the same weight. A sack was placed down on the counter, and the old man slowly opened his eyes. Others wouldn't remember, but he would. Rather than checking the sack, he gazed into Theron's eyes. An unwavering pair of icy blue gems looked back at him. The old man moved, and the head in the sack was revealed. Rotund rolls of fat spilled over, the dried blood unable to mask it. The Greycoat mission has been completed. The old man rolled a thumb over one of his fingers, and a rune manifested, revealing a silver ring. With a light glow, a card and 3 pristine bottles appeared. No matter how uncaring the surrounding assassins had been prior to this, they all heard these words clearly. Even if the old man hadn't spoken, for a bronze assassin to receive such substantial rewards, it could only be thanks to one mission. Many rose from their seats to get a better look. Huh, a young man looked up. His nose was large, and his eyes were narrow. Somehow his face still felt a bit flat. "What happened?" he asked. He hadn't been paying enough attention earlier and hadn't even noticed Theron walk in. "The Greycoat mission, it's completed." "Oh, Lynn did it." The young man's eyes lit up. "Lynn? No, I don't recognize this guy." The young man was taken aback. He stood to his feet and looked over, and when he saw who it was, he, too, was shocked. Unlike the others, though, it was because he recognized Theron. The commotion in the room wasn't enough to faze Theron. He expected this to happen. He was only interested in returning to his room and having a night's rest. After so long on the road, he hadn't had a good night's rest in weeks. Though he had some thoughts about how he would digest his gains, now wasn't the time to consider such things. Unfortunately, his path was blocked before he could do so. "It's you." The flat-faced young man stood in Theron's way. Most called this young man Big Nose, though Theron knew his name to be Manson. The two weren't acquainted with one another, so Theron had no idea why his path was being blocked. "How did you do it?" Didn't Lin take this mission? You completed it before him. The more questions Manson asked, the deeper Theron's frown became. Get out of my way. I'm not familiar with you. Theron spoke coldly, a dangerous light flickering in his eyes. Manson couldn't react as Theron brushed by him, moving down the dimly lit halls. When he recovered, he was livid. If you think that mission is so easy to complete, you've got another thing coming, arrogant bastard. Theron's steps paused for a moment before he continued walking. For some reason, he didn't believe Manson was lying. Chapter 5, Strength. Manson's satisfaction only lasted for a moment. His heart skipped a beat the next moment, realizing he had said something he shouldn't have. The satisfaction was short-lived, but the price he might pay for it was steep. He gave a quick glance around and rushed away, hoping that no one would mind what he had said too much. What he didn't expect was to be called for a meeting just a few hours later, and by an even more unexpected person at that. Silver assassin Raiden sat in a simple wooden chair, his clothing prim and formal, as though preparing to attend a ball. He crossed one leg over the other as Manson walked in, looking up with a calm gaze. The accommodations for silver assassins were beyond that of bronze ones by a good measure, but Manson didn't dare to look around and confirm. The bronze assassin stared right at Raiden's feet, not looking up even once. I've heard that the Greycoat mission has been completed. Yes. Manson hurried to nod, almost feeling that he was answering too slowly. And it's not by bronze assassin Lin. And no, it was another bronze assassin, a newbie. I'm not even sure what his name is. A new recruit. Raiden raised an eyebrow. Even while sharing the same title of Bronze Mancer, not all such assassins were created equal. There were strong divisions and large gaps between them all. The association would only bring those who had yet to cultivate into the fold. It was the only way to weaken the possibility of spies. The largest demographic of new blood came from orphans. The last batch of new recruits was from 4 months ago or so. Assuming even his own speed of progression, this new recruit couldn't possibly have surpassed more than the 3rd resonance. Why yes, Silver Lord. Raiden chuckled at the ridiculous title, but didn't pursue it. How do you know this, new recruit? I don't know him well. I came across him as a new recruit and stole his welcome gift. Manson grit his teeth after explaining this. What he had done was against the rules, and there were punishments for it, but he also didn't dare to lie to a silver assassin. Plus, although he used the word stole, there wasn't much resistance at all. Theron hadn't fought back like the others and had simply handed the quota of bronzes and pills over without a word. It was such a short interaction that Manson wouldn't have remembered it if not for how odd it was. Most would feel dissatisfaction, unwillingness, at least a hint of anger, but Theron was like an icy well. He had fathomless depths and a frigid core. Even today, he made no attempt at revenge, as though he had truly not cared back then. I see, Raiden nodded. I also heard that you mentioned something you shouldn't have today. Manson froze, his shoulders trembling. He wanted to grip his fists, but fearing that it would be seen as a sign of aggression, his fingers splayed outward instead. It would have been a comical sight if not for already being drenched in sweat. I wonder, who would you have heard such a thing from? Raiden uncrossed his legs, recrossing them with the other on top. He leaned onto the wooden chair's armrest, staring at Manson like he was looking at a plaything. The answer was clear to them both. That day Lin took the mission, Raiden and Manson had been there. What others didn't know was that Raiden was the one who pushed his younger brother to take the mission. Back when Raiden was a bronze assassin, he had wanted to take this mission as well, but his master refused. When he asked why, he hadn't received an answer. Since then, Raiden had been somewhat obsessed with finding out more about this, so he sent his younger brother, hoping to gain an inkling. He knew how dangerous it would be, especially if Lin somehow succeeded. It was just that he didn't care. Brotherly affection was nowhere near the top of his list of priorities. That glory should have been his, but much like Manson didn't dare to slight him, He didn't dare to ignore his master's words. Now it seemed he might find out what was so special about that mission. It had just happened in unexpected fashion. "Where is Lynn?" Raiden asked. I. Manson was so shaken by the earlier threat that he couldn't formulate his words. What made it worse was the fact Raiden didn't even try to hurry him, sitting there and staring with a smiling expression. He still hasn't come back. You may go. Manson scrambled away, feeling like he had just been pardoned. Neither knew just yet that Lynn would never return, but Raiden had a suspicion. He was already wondering just who had killed his younger brother. Could he have failed the mission and left an easy path for Theron? Or, Raiden chuckled. If a new recruit was so bold, things might get interesting. Theron had long fallen into the embrace of sleep. The lines of his face looked much gentler now, painting the image of a time long past. The cold sternness was washed away, replaced by the image of a 14-year-old boy with delicate yet-to-mature features and a natural state that was both gentle and playful. Unfortunately, even Theron himself didn't know if that version of himself would ever return. His mind was haunted by images of that day, the flashes of lightning and the last moments of his family. He had read many books about the selfishness of humans, but it wasn't until that day that he truly understood the extent of it. To wipe out a family, a clan, a lineage, for no other reason than to further your strength. The most sickening part was that he should have died with them. If he hadn't been so hung up on his stupid books, he would have been there. Then he wouldn't have to suffer this pain alone. Chapter 6. No. 6 months ago. Theron, come with us. A little girl pulled on Theron's arm. She was barely a day over 10 years old, but her little hands had surprising strength. A pair of large blue eyes adorned her face, along with a button nose and vibrant pink lips that looked like they belonged on a doll. Quite used to his little sister's antics, Theron continued to rock in his chair comfortably. The calming pitter-patter of rain rebounded against the window. This was his favorite spot in the whole house, and it was only made better when it was raining. Though he was a Water Mancer, he preferred to be on the inside. He felt that rainfall should be observed, not experienced. There was nothing fun about getting his neat robes ruined. Little Bobo was the opposite. Rain scared her, especially when it was storming, but she'd also be the first to stomp her way into the nearest puddle. "All right, don't disturb your brother anymore, little Bobo. You know the Imperial exams are coming up soon." A woman who didn't look a day over 20 stepped into the room. Her hair was done up in delicate braids, and if it wasn't for fear of blasphemy, most might call her Empress on instinct when they first saw her. Theron's mother was the only member of their small family without blue eyes, but she carried the same iciness as the rest of them. Well, the rest of them if Theron was excluded. The affinities of Mancers were hereditary, but nothing was perfect. While his family had been born as Ice Mancers, Theron had been born a Water Mancer. This wasn't a big deal to a layman, but the gap between the two was exceptional. Ice Mancers were existences feared no less than Lightning Mancers or the rare Light and Dark Mancers. Water Mancers, however, were lacking in combat power and were mostly auxiliary supports in battle. Theron had never really minded any of this. He didn't like to fight. He much preferred to stay home and read. Becoming a scholar was his dream. He thought it was much easier to change the world with words and reason as opposed to a large fist. Soon, he would become an imperial scholar, the first step toward entering the emperor's imperial court and rising to the status of prime minister. When he wielded that power, he would be able to change the world for the better. Little Bobo pouted, stubbornly climbing into her brother's lap and lying down. A triumphant smile spread across her little face. How would he read now? A deep laugh came from the side. A solid man who had been stoking the flames of their fireplace stood to his feet. He walked over and picked his daughter up, saving his son from the little demon. Their father was no less handsome than their mother was beautiful. His only flaw was the scruffy, slightly graying mustache he sported over his top lip, a feature that garnered no shortage of ridicule from his little girl. "Bleh, bleh, bleh, too itchy." Little Bobo dodged a kiss, scrambling across her father's body like a spry monkey and claiming a new spot on his back. Theron looked up with a smile. Watching his family's antics and listening to the dance of the rain across the window, he felt true peace. The thoughts that consumed him were far too mature for his age. What 13-year-old would be so clear-headed to enjoy such a moment? Maybe if he were 60 years older, it would have made more sense. That was when the image warped. Time lost its meaning, and Theron found himself rushing through the fields. He had already fallen once, his pristine robes covered in blotches of mud. How had this happened? Why had this happened? The festival had taken place on a rainy day, but to a town filled with Water Mancers, this might as well have been a plus. Everything was perfect, so why was this happening? Peals of lightning stretched across the skies like a net, particularly large bolts weaving in and out, almost like dragons bobbing through the heavens. The pang in his heart grew worse and worse. He couldn't hear the screams over the raging thunder, but he could feel their deaths. His senses had always been amplified in the rain. Maybe of everyone present, he was the first to realize that something was wrong. But there was still nothing he could do to change it. Haggard breaths came from his lips, his lungs threatening to tear themselves apart. His throat felt as though a flaming devil was clawing its way up from the pit of his stomach, and his heart hurt so much he almost lost sensation. Finally, he made it over the hill, and what he saw was a scene he would never forget. A man wearing fluttering golden robes stood high in the skis. Bolts of lightning fell one after another, most aimed toward him, but a few stray sparks made their way through. The citizens of their town couldn't withstand even these small wisps. Just being in proximity to them claimed their lives. Theron could see his family below. His father shielded little Bobo and his mother behind him. His little sister had her eyes closed tight, her small arms wrapped around his neck. No. He felt the bolt before it even descended, and the man in the sky's reaction was even clearer. Standing in those fluttering golden robes, the man casually waved a palm and blocked only a portion of it. He could have blocked it all, Theron was certain. He could feel it. Theron's family was burnt to ash in a single strike. He felt his father's final struggle, but it was all for naught. Who could stand against heaven's fury? His gaze went white with grief and rage. Why his family? Why this town? Why here? Who would do this? The words he heard next were forever etched into his soul. Chapter 7, Fourth Resonance. Theron lay in bed shirtless. A necklace hung from his neck, taking the shape of an inconspicuous sword. Every time he took a breath, a frosty energy would be sucked into it. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, a cold sweat forming a thin layer over him. I will let you live, stoke that hatred, become the fuel for my karma. Theron sat up on his elbows, his core muscles softening and solidifying beneath his heavy breathing. His delicate skin reddened considerably, a spike of rage twisting his immature features. Every night, the same dream again and again. It was certainly not natural. It acted as a reminder, a brand on his soul to stoke his hatred. There wouldn't be a moment of peace until one of them died. Mancers were separated into 4 categories: Spirit Mancers, Soul Mancers, Flux Mancers, and Elemental Mancers. Most were born with a strong affinity for one, though depending on your starting mancy. It was possible to transition to one of the others with time and effort. The man whose tribulation killed his family and most of his town was a Spirit Mancer. This path of mancy was most simply defined as the ability to use mana as a proxy to absorb the resultant mana of others. This was the textbook definition, vague and hard to understand for most. Only an imperial scholar like Theron would know it as such. Most others would know it in vague terms. If a layman were asked, they might say it was the rarest mancy, that it allowed one to read minds and control the soul or complete acts of divination. Or, in Theron's experience, it allowed one to absorb bad karma to strengthen themselves. The Spirit Mancer who killed his family had done so for no other reason than to use their resentment to pass his tribulations smoothly. He let Theron live for no other reason than he believed it might help him with a breakthrough in the future. Theron did not know his name. He didn't know who this person was, if he was close by or far away. He didn't even know what level of strength this person wielded. All he knew was that to enter the Gold Mancy level, there was no such tribulation. Either this man was far above Gold Mancers, or he practiced a technique that brought down heavenly judgment. Theron hadn't even been a Bronze Mancer back then. He had no way of deciphering that man's strength, but his face was burned into his memory, as were the events of that day. Even if he wanted to forget, he couldn't. Theron pulled himself out of bed. He hadn't slept in the hideout, but had instead chosen to stay in the inn. It was safer here. After washing up, he gathered his things and placed a palm on the mirror. Soon, he was in his association accommodations. The stone bed was cold and hard, but Theron didn't mind. The coolness helped him calm from this morning's events, and after a while of sitting on it in silence, he had adjusted himself enough to pull out his gains. He left the coins to the side and took out the 3 pills. They were the most common pills of improvement, bronze resonance pills. To become a Mancer, one needed to form a bronze core. This core would take shape in one's dantian and act as the center of one's accumulation. Resonance pills helped to refine and rid one's core of impurities. These, in particular, were of mid-tier quality, making them perfect for Theron's requirements. Raiden wasn't wrong. Theron was indeed at the 3rd resonance. One needed to complete 9 resonances to attempt a breakthrough to Silver Mancy. Lyn had been at the 7th resonance, and Merchant Greycoat had been at the 9th. It was just that Theron's strength in the rain was probably a match for anyone beneath Silver Mancy. Well, if Merchant Greycoat had some actual combat skill to match his obscene wealth, he could have very well killed Theron. But the man was ultimately a paper tiger who only had his cultivation thanks to said wealth. As one might expect, Theron would use these mid-tier bronze resonance pills to enter the 4th resonance. After a final breath, he swallowed the first pill. His skin began to heat up, reddening beneath the strain. Deep within his body, the medicinal strength of the first pill rushed through his meridians. It split along the winding paths and suddenly converged on his bronze core all at once. Theron clenched his teeth beneath the strain, a whirlwind of mana forming in his dantian. The force compressed his bronze core again, and then again. It took 3 hours before the effects died down. By then, Theron was drenched. It felt like he had just run a long distance at his fastest pace, his heart taking a long while to settle down. Almost there. He swallowed the 2nd pill. The process repeated itself, but this time Theron withstood it with far greater ease for 2 reasons. First, because this was his 2nd time eating a mid-tier pill, and second, because his meridians had already sufficiently widened. In practice, one wasn't supposed to take a mid-tier resonance pill until the 4th resonance, but Theron was using it to break through instead. Theron should have been using a breakthrough-type pill, but those were far too expensive. A single mid-tier bronze resonance pill easily cost 10,000 bronzes. That was the market price, but it wasn't a surprise to see them go for double. A breakthrough pill of the same caliber would cost 5 times that at worst. In the end, it was all worth it. There was a crack in Theron's bronze core, and its outer layer peeled away like the shell of a boiled egg. Beneath, a brighter bronze was revealed, more resplendent and shimmering than the last. Theron released a turbid breath and slowly opened his eyes. He had succeeded, and in the process, he had even saved a pill. Chapter 8, Wealth. Theron stretched, his bones popping and cracking. There was a new sheen of sweat coating his body, a mixture of dead skin and the impurities from his previous bronze core. The first thing he did was return to his inn room and scrub himself clean. As he did so, he planned out his next steps. He needed a new dagger, but he also needed more Mancy methods. If Spirit Mancers dealt in matters of divination and karma, Soul Mancers were the beast tamers, alchemists, and blacksmiths of the world. The two were opposite sides of the same coin. Spirit Mancers absorbed the mana of others to strengthen themselves, while Soul Mancers granted their mana to others to strengthen them. Much the same way, Flux and Elemental Mancers were likewise opposites, the latter controlling the external elements to cast techniques, and the former using mana to instead strengthen their bodies directly. Bronze soul items, crafted by Soul Mancer blacksmiths, were no less expensive than pills. In most cases, they were even more costly. The more Theron thought about it, the more he felt that the rewards for this supposedly impossible mission were far too low. He had thought this before, but it didn't truly make sense to him until he heard Manson's slip of the tongue. If this was truly a mission none were meant to complete, the coins might have been kept artificially low, just to ensure no one was tempted to take drastic measures and upset the status quo. But in that case, two questions remained. Why put the mission up at all, then? And who had a vested interest in ensuring it never succeeded, even after almost half a decade? On the other hand, did any of that matter when he now had the sum of the merchant's wealth in his hands? Thistlebrook City was one of the 10 largest cities outside the core of the Empire. 6 months ago, Theron had come here to complete the Imperial Scholar exams, an event that took place once every 3 years. Every young scholar hopeful was allowed 2 chances to pass, and the test could be taken any time before one's 17th birthday. Having succeeded, Theron's standing in the city was quite high. Peeling off the skin mask, Theron revealed his true face for the first time in over a month. The face staring back at him was youthful, but it already carried a budding handsomeness. His brows sloped gently, and his jaw was slowly sharpening over time. He wasn't particularly tall, standing at just 56, but he still had time to grow. Regardless, whether it was his temperament or his posture, both were beyond his years. Theron slipped out of the crowded tavern with no one being any wiser. The flow of traffic was so great that none noticed a young man who had never entered had just exited. Robes of white and violet fluttered around him, the insignia of an imperial scholar hanging from his waist. The emblem appeared to be carved from white stone. At its center, a black bird outlined in gold soared within a wreath of black roses. His long black hair was tied with a ribbon of violet silk that matched his robes in shade and tone. Everywhere he went, he received looks of awe and adulation. To the people of Thistlebrook, seeing an imperial scholar was no different from seeing a celebrity. To the Night Empire, Theron was treated quite well, too. He had received an honorary noble title, not to mention discounts across any imperial clan-owned establishments. Though this privilege would only last for the duration of his studies, it was a great advantage nonetheless. With his identity, Theron walked into the tallest building in the city. The pagoda seemed to soar into the clouds, though this was mostly an illusion of grandeur. The establishment was known as the Nightingale Pagoda, or rather, it was a branch of it. There were many merchants, merchant guilds, and merchant families in the Empire, but there was only one main exchange and trading hub. It was the imperial family's not-so-subtle method of keeping everything in check, but no one minded. It kept all the prices regulated, and the competition was good for consumers. The downside was that breaking into the market as a new merchant was almost impossible. And on Theron's side of things, there was no black market for him to take advantage of. "Hello, young scholar. How might I help you today?" An attractive, middle-aged woman greeted Theron with a bow. Although he had walked in with a sea of people, she easily picked him out of the crowd, giving him the treatment due to an imperial scholar. Theron smiled politely. "I would like to buy a weapon, a dagger preferably, low-tier bronze soul. I would also like to take a look at some of your techniques, low-tier as well. I am a Water Mancer." The woman's eyes lit up. "Yes, of course. Please follow me, young master." Her voice trailed off. Theron, she continued quickly. "You can call me Stara. I'll prepare a catalog for you immediately. Please follow me." Theron was escorted away beneath the envious gazes of many and led to a private room. Soon, A personally curated catalog was placed right before him. As expected of the Nightingale Pagoda, their selection was not small. Considering his requirements were only for the low tier, it wasn't surprising that the choices were so deep. There were more than 300 Water Mancer daggers to choose from. Techniques were rarer, but even then, there were almost 100. Most are redundant. Of the selection of daggers, the majority were mass-produced goods with only small variations between them. As for the techniques, they were similar in that they mostly performed the same actions. The price of the daggers ranged from around 3,000 to 7,000 bronzes. As for the techniques, they were more expensive, going up to about double the upper end. Theron quickly made his choices. Chapter 9, Good Blade. Stara rushed in as though gliding on a cloud, handing Theron a sleek white box. Inside, there was a dagger with a 7-inch curved blade. The cool edge radiated a touch of blue light, and the handle was a dense black that contrasted well. Theron picked up the dagger and balanced it in his palm. He resisted the urge to use any knife skills, cognizant of the fact that he was an Imperial scholar right now, not an assassin. Good blade, he commented perfunctorily. In reality, it was a bit worse than his short sword, but he had yet to see a low-tier bronze soul weapon that matched up to his short sword. For the cost of 6,300 bronzes, it was good enough. Stara beamed, seeing that Theron was happy. She brought in the 3 techniques he had exchanged for soon after. There was a clear vision in Theron's mind. He had only just started on the path of cultivation, but his mind had been filled with books on military strategy. The path of the Imperial scholar was actually twofold. There was the military intelligence path and the Imperial court path. Theron had reluctantly studied the military path in the past, only because the exams covered both aspects, not expecting it to come in handy. Compared to most, he was much sharper in the art of combat and how to secure victory. As such, his techniques of choice fell into 3 categories. First, defense, second, ranged assault, and third, movement. The defensive technique he chose was the most powerful of the 3. Water Mancer wasn't good at attack or speed and agility, but it was excellent in defense. Bursting water shield. This method was an oddly technical one. It had 4 stages of mastery like all techniques did, each one allowing for an elevated level of control. At the entry boundary, blocking was the greatest result one could expect. It functioned exactly like other shield skills, though the potential was far more limited than those formed by Earth Mancers, for example. Upon transcending to the proficient boundary, it was possible to trap and contain attacks, redirecting them under the right circumstances, or slowing down attacks too powerful for the technique to stop outright to allow the opportunity to dodge. Beyond was the adept boundary. This was the stage where one gained access to the moniker of the technique, burst. Burst was an added layer of complexity, allowing the user of the water shield to deconstruct and self-destruct the technique in a controlled fashion. Used at the right time, it could dispel an attack of great strength, redirecting it into several smaller portions. A step beyond this was the consummate boundary, but it represented something deeper than just an added ability or usage type. Water bullet. This was the ranged spell Theron chose. They were slower than wind bullets and less penetrating, but they couldn't be ignored either. With each added stage of mastery, one could control more bullets with greater dexterity. Finally, there was Touch of Mirage. Once again, Water Mancers were not well known for their speed, but their auxiliary abilities were still quite good. Touch of Mirage allowed Theron to convert his water mana into mist to disrupt his enemy's senses and add mystery to his movements. At the entry boundary, this wasn't too obvious, but at the adept boundary, he could even create semi-realistic clones of himself from the mist. The sum total was over 45,000 bronzes. Theron paid this price without a hint of a frown before bidding Stara farewell. This money had, of course, come from Merchant Greycoat. In truth, between all the bank cards and promissory notes, let alone bronzes, The fat merchant had a wealth nearing 100,000 silvers. For context, a single silver was worth 100 bronzes. Even further, all of this wealth was just what Theron could scrounge up from physical cash alone. If he were to sell the merchant's treasures and other assets, this wealth would easily triple. But he couldn't. Spending this much was already pushing it. No one would blink because he was an imperial scholar, but it was already odd that a 14-year-old with access to this much wealth would need to buy techniques through such a channel. Shouldn't they be provided by his family? This didn't mention the fact he had yet to look into the mystery of what was so special about the merchant. He didn't have time to go through all of Greycoat's belongings, because it was only a matter of time before the signal flare he had sparked attracted others to the estate. Theron walked out of the private room, the embroidered box that carried his dagger resting under an arm. The memory jades that held the techniques were already slotted away into a pouch on his waist. He had long since memorized them, but kept them safe nonetheless. Theron. A sweet voice drifted to Theron's ears. Looking up, he found a group of 5, 3 women and 2 men, walking toward the private rooms together. Theron always did his homework, so he knew who these people were. 2 of them wore imperial scholar uniforms, including the young girl who had just spoken. The other 3, however, wore uniforms that were quite eye-catching. The uniforms of the young imperial scholars were white and violet, while the true nobles, those who graduated and went on to take up official positions in the army or government, wore black and violet. These 3 youths, though, wore black and gold. They were facing Theron, so he couldn't see their backs, but he was sure that if they turned around, he would see a golden moon on their backs as well. The Obsidian Eclipse sect was the most powerful in the Empire, but that didn't mean it was the only one. These youths were from the Luminescent Moon sect, a powerhouse in the region. In fact, they held more influence than the Marquis Mansion. The young girl's eyes lit up when she confirmed that it was Theron, running up with a happy smile. Chapter 10, Teacher Fern. The young girl was maybe 12 or 13 years old. Her cheeks puffed out in an adorable sort of way, and her red hair was done up in a pair of pigtails. Freckles dotted her cheeks and little nose, a pair of bright green eyes standing out in contrast. Theron couldn't help but smile when he saw this little girl. She probably wasn't a breath above 5 feet, but she seemed larger. It was impossible to believe that she knew any bad or evil existed in the world at all. Theron, where'd you go? You just up and disappeared. Teacher Fern is very unhappy. Just handling something, Theron replied, his voice soft and gentle. Classes were not mandatory. The structure of the Imperial Scholar's path was quite lax. Exams were taken when the student was ready, not at a set time, and so long as you were completing a certain number of credits within an allotted time, you wouldn't be bothered. There were some geniuses, groomed by powerful families, that only entered the academy for a few months, clearing the credit threshold quickly before graduating to jobs long prepared for them. Theron was already on schedule, so it wasn't a problem even if he disappeared for another half-year. That's what you always say. What could you possibly have to do? Teacher Fern is worried about you. The little girl seemed to realize that there were others around and blushed. Her gaze darted about, her instinct being to hide behind Theron, but that would only make it worse. Among the girls that had followed her, one who looked to be 16 or 17 years old smiled at Theron. She wore the robes of a Luminescent Moon sect disciple. Little Sadie, who's this? This is Theron. He is in my class, Sadie recovered and explained. Theron, this is Thessa. She's from the Luminescent Moon sect. She's my brother's. Just Thessa is fine, she said with a chuckle. Sadie blinked and then turned to everyone else. This is Soren and Tegan. Then there's Flora, who you already know. Soren and Tegan were the 2 boys of the group. They were both around Thessa's age and from the sect. Flora was a girl from another class under a teacher Bloom, if Theron recalled correctly. He greeted them all with grace. All of his mannerisms seemed to come from an etiquette teacher's dream. There was nothing to pick at. Then I'll have to bid you all farewell, Theron said after some small talk. He had training to do and couldn't waste time here. If you're all around in the future, I'm sure we'll have more time to get better acquainted. Soren smiled, giving Theron a jovial pat on the shoulder. He was a bit handsy, but that also seemed to be his personality, so Theron didn't mind it too much. Of course, we'll be around for a mission the next couple of weeks. Since little Sadie likes you so much, have dinner with us sometime. A not-so-subtle stomp to the foot made Soren wince, and the others laughed at his expense. Theron bowed once more and slipped away. A gaze watched his back vanish into the crowd, a curious light in its depths. Nice kid, Soren chuckled, earning himself another stomp. Theron frowned long after he left the pagoda. He walked with a brisk pace, heading toward the academy, but his thoughts were on the group he had just met. Namely, the 3 from the luminescent moon sect. Disciples taking missions wasn't out of the norm, but what mission allowed them to come into the city? Most sect missions would be related to training, killing beasts, finding herbs in dangerous locales, etc. But Soren said they would be in the city for 2 weeks. Why did it sound like they had come more for leisure than anything else? The sect was a place to grow warriors. Most weren't even allowed to leave without special cause. Why would they allow a group of 3 to meander about in the city for several weeks? What mission could be so lax? The Imperial Scholar Academy wasn't as grand as the pagoda. The gates were simple and unadorned, a rolling pair of large wooden doors that emitted a delicate floral scent. Inside, the rest of the academy was much the same. The principles of a scholar, whether on the path of imperial politics or military, were rife with reminders of humility and modesty. I will have to take them up on their offer of dinner and monitor this situation. This was the conclusion Theron came to before he suddenly smiled bitterly. A familiar and sharp fragrance filled his nose, and he saw the person before he laid eyes on them. A heavy-set woman thundered forward. Though a bit chubby, her appearance was pleasing to the eyes, looking like a kind, middle-aged housewife. Trouble was, this housewife seemed to have a bone to pick. "Teacher Fern," Theron greeted with a bow. "Oh, so you still know to call me teacher. You haven't forgotten in the last month you've been gone." Theron lowered his head and didn't reply. His answers were effective against Sadie, but not so much against this valiant woman. Don't think that just because you're ahead on credits that you can just up and leave whenever you feel like it. You have a good chance to become one of the few perfect credit students. Do you know how valuable that title is in the Empire? Don't waste your potential. Yes, teacher. Teacher Fern laid into Theron for several more minutes. She had gotten used to punching at this airbag. The softer and less resistant Theron went, the harder she had to go. The first time she lambasted this young man, it had fallen flat because he just accepted without a word. Now she knew not to fall for his tricks so easily. After a while, she was finally out of breath. Tomorrow, there'll be an exchange between our class and Teacher Bloom's. You will be there, or by the gods, I will rip you out of your bed by the ears. Are we clear? Yes, teacher. Theron smiled bitterly. So that's what this was all about.